The Spectrum Retreat is a unique hybrid between a story experience and a puzzle game. It was released in 2018 by Dan Smith, who developed it over a 5-year period since he was 15 years old. The voice acting, testing, and soundtrack were all provided by the publisher, Ripstone Games. It's much shorter and not as monotonous as The Witness, but also not a full-blown walking simulator like Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. Normally, whenever a game tries to be two things at once, it tends to fail more in one area than it does in the other, but I don't believe that to be the case with this game. The retail price is $12.99 USD, which is probably about $5 too much for how short the game is. I was able to beat the game during one recording session that lasted just shy of 4 hours. I want to preface this video by saying I enjoyed the game the very first time I played it, and I still enjoyed it while recording the footage for this video. However, I don't think it's something worth playing twice unless you wait long enough to forget how most of the puzzles work so you can have some semblance of a challenge on your second time through. I want to give a brief, spoiler-free summary of the game before I delve into it because I do think that it's something worth playing at least once if you're looking for a lighter gaming experience for a couple of hours. You wake up in the Penrose Hotel with no memory of ever checking in. The staff is entirely automated and you receive a message from somebody saying that you're likely being held against your will. You unravel the story both in the shorter sequences within the hotel itself and in the rooms where you complete the puzzles. The puzzles themselves are completed by absorbing the colors from these cubes to pass through the correctly colored barriers so you can enter the elevator to the next puzzle. These were never really difficult, but they do begin to add new mechanics with their own unique challenges to them as time goes on. I would say that you spend 80% of your time completing these puzzles and the other 20% within the hotel itself getting ready for the next set. There's story details that you will discover in these puzzle chambers. All of them can be ignored, but there are a couple that you will probably still be able to hear even if you're not actively listening to it. Like I said before, the entire game can be completed in less than 4 hours if you don't struggle with any of the puzzles, but I cannot see this taking longer than 5 hours unless you intentionally waste time. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, I highly recommend that you stop watching the video now and go play the game. I think it might be a bit pricey for what it brings with it, but the story it tells and the overall experience makes it worth the entry fee if you enjoy these kinds of games. The story itself is something that is best experienced without any expectations. For those of you who aren't bothered by that sort of thing, or maybe you need to see a little bit more of the story and gameplay to make a proper decision, just keep in mind that I will be spoiling the entire story, but I will not be showing every single puzzle. Normally, the way I would do one of these videos is more of a commentary fashion where I walk through every stage of the game as if you were playing it. This is what I did with my critique of The Last of Us 2. I went through the moment-to-moment gameplay, discussing every major, story-relevant detail that you could come across if you were actively playing the game. I think that this approach was necessary for that video due to how long the story is and just how hard it would be to summarize the plot, because a lot of the larger plot moments are set up in the smaller details. I quickly realized that if I were to take that approach with this video, it would be excessively long and not all that interesting, because the plot points are given to you both in the hotel moments and the puzzles themselves, and because the game itself is so short, I think it would be easier to recap the entire story all at once instead of trying to walk you through the entire game step by step. For this reason, I'm going to start off by discussing the puzzles because it's what you spend the majority of the time doing, and I will only bring up the plot points within these puzzles when we are discussing the story. I can already tell that this is going to keep the video more focused, and hopefully it will make it more interesting in the process. With that being said, let's talk about the puzzles. Like I said earlier, I won't be covering every single individual puzzle in the game. There are 33 puzzles total, which is about 17 too few in my opinion, especially with how quick you can get through some of them. There were only a few moments where I got stuck, and one puzzle near the end that I remember struggling with just as much on my first playthrough as I did on my second. The design of the puzzles you'll be solving is quite simple. You need to swap the color you're currently holding with a color that you need so you can bypass different colored barriers. Most of the time, you'll be using this technique to place a color onto a specific cube so you can grab it whenever you're in a spot where it's needed. The easiest example for this is when there are numerous barriers back to back and you need to set up your colors accordingly. Unlike some other puzzle games that I've played, there are certain puzzles that you can actually fail. This can be as simple as falling off the map if you're holding the same color as a barrier that you're meant to use as a bridge and causing you to fall through, or mismanaging the colors you were given and you're needing to restart the puzzle and try again. This can happen more often than you think whenever these are introduced. These blocks function as an infinite source of a specific color, and instead of swapping the color you're currently holding with it, you will instead replace it with whatever color the block is. If you do this while holding a color that you need later on, then you will permanently lose it until you restart the puzzle. This concept is interesting because it makes you think harder about what you're doing instead of just mindlessly trying to force your way through it, but there were several times when I would have 3 different colors and need to swap one of them out with these source blocks to proceed without knowing whether or not this would hinder my progress later on. This can turn the puzzle into a game of trial and error because you can't always see what color the barrier blocking the exit is. This only happens a handful of times, but I can imagine how annoying it is for somebody to give up the wrong color with no way of knowing that they needed it later, forcing them to restart the entire puzzle. You can also fail by mismanaging your colors. Not every puzzle has one of these provider blocks. Some of them test your ability to manage the colors that you've been given without accidentally leaving them somewhere that you can't reach without it. An example of this happening to me was on the 3rd floor puzzles when the teleporters are introduced. You need to hold a specific color that coincides with that teleporter. This puzzle has just enough of each color to where you need to manage them appropriately, so if you jump down from a higher platform without access to the red cube, you will need to restart the challenge. On top of this, there's one of those multiple barrier sections, so you need to put each color on a specific block without much flexibility. I made a serious mistake whenever I got through the barriers, grabbed the blue cube, and jumped down before moving one of the reds to the final spot I needed to be at. This locked me out of the final barrier and prevented me from being able to use the red teleporter to get to the spot where I left all the colors. It was also the moment whenever I realized that these puzzles are so tightly designed that I couldn't simply jump from one platform to the next. I had to restart the challenge and do it again. As you can see, the game does add more mechanics to keep the puzzles interesting as you progress to each floor. I don't think that the puzzles have a variety problem, there's just simply not enough of them. By the time you feel like you've really mastered a concept and you're ready to move on to a more complex set of them, you're already finished. The final puzzle serves as a comprehensive gauntlet to take you through all the concepts that you've been introduced to throughout the game, and it tests you on them. It's also the stage for a major revelation in the story, and it's great. It's a large 3-part set of challenges that makes you restart the entire thing if you fail. The game could have really benefited from having at least one of these on every floor, or at the very least, a more advanced section where things are much more challenging. Some would say if the biggest criticism you have about a game is that you want more of it, then it could be viewed as a twisted compliment, and that almost applies here. If there were more puzzles, then the pacing of the story might suffer, but at the same time, I can't help but feel like the game could greatly benefit from another hour of playtime in these puzzle chambers. Before we move on to the story, I want to briefly go over all the puzzle concepts you'll see in this game. You've probably seen most of them in the footage that's playing, but I want to go over it all in a little more detail. Each floor has its own puzzle concept. The first floor has 5 puzzles that only consist of the basics of swapping colors with blocks and bypassing barriers. The second floor introduces the color provider blocks and the concept of holding the incorrect color to walk on a horizontal barrier like it's a bridge. Most of these puzzles are more complicated versions of the first and are primarily here to teach you how to manage your colors properly. None of these are very challenging, which would be okay if this floor didn't have the most puzzles in the entire game. This is the only floor that has 10 puzzles, which I think is a bit of a misstep. You should be doing more puzzles as the game goes on, not less. The third floor has 9 puzzles and introduces you to teleporters. They're more like magnetic walls that pull you towards them, but the game refers to them as teleporters, so that's what we're going with. The very first puzzle on this floor is only here to introduce you to the concept, and it does a pretty good job at it. In fact, it's weird that this floor only has 9 puzzles when the first 2 are basically a free pass. If nothing else, it should have 10 to 11 to compensate for how easy these first few are. The fourth floor has 8 puzzles and introduces the concept of rotating the room. I think this is the coolest concept, and this first puzzle is more than just a free pass. It's not very difficult, but it does bring back the teleporter concept for some added challenge. I think that a lot more can be done with this mechanic than any other that we've seen so far, so it's a shame that we only get 8 puzzles out of it, not including the final challenge. These can be intimidating just because of how weird the room can look when it's rotated and there's all these moving blocks. Needless to say, this floor was the most interesting to me, and the final puzzle is one that I always get stuck on the most. It requires you to use the walls and ceilings to get to areas you otherwise couldn't reach, while also managing your colors so you can use the proper teleporter. I found this to be the hardest puzzle in the entire game, and it still only took me about 12 minutes to complete. Somebody who's really good at puzzles would have no problem and could easily complete it in 5 minutes. The final floor only has 1 puzzle, but it has 3 parts to it. The first part is about color management, teleporters, and rotating the room a few times. This is the only one I failed because there's a point of no return near the end of this section where if you didn't put the green cube in a very specific spot, you cannot proceed and will be stuck. The second part is mostly about rotating the room and teleporters, and it was much more lenient with making mistakes by giving you a way to rotate the room back to normal and try again. This is good because I would have had to reset about 5 times if this wasn't implemented. The final challenge, which I expected to be where all the concepts come together, is the easiest of the 3. I think you're meant to believe that you can make this jump and then fall into a reset, but you just need to teleport down and then flip the room to proceed. The coolest part is how it flips the entire subway station so you can access the platform with the elevator. Hopefully you can see from this part of the video why I think the game doesn't expand on its challenges enough. I know that difficulty is subjective, but I really don't feel like these puzzles were complicated enough, and I think that bumping the number up to 50 would have made this feel much more satisfying. Thankfully, I think that the story and atmosphere of this game is much, much better. I'd even go as far as to say that it's the best thing that the game does. In order to get through the story in a reasonable time frame, I'm going to avoid speaking about every minor detail until closer to the end. Instead, I'm going to focus mainly on the major plot points. We begin with you waking up in your hotel room. For now, we don't know who you are or how you got here. You're directed to the restaurant by the hotel manager and begin receiving ominous messages from your phone. The entire hotel staff is completely automated and you're the only person staying here. After you eat, you're contacted by a woman named Cooper who says you're likely being held against your will. I think that the voice acting in this game is very well done and Cooper's actress is no exception.
Don't let the staff know you have this phone. My name's Cooper. I believe you're being held here against your will. I'm gonna try to help you, but you must do everything I say.
She makes some comments about setting things right and tries to get you through the elevator. This, of course, doesn't work and you need to try something else. You're told in not so many words that the entire hotel is a computer simulation and it's being used to hold you prisoner. The only way you can gain the credentials you need to escape the simulation is by entering an authentication chamber and completing the puzzles we looked at earlier. This will gain you access to the next floor in the next set of puzzles, all while filling in the story details along the way. I think Cooper's character is very well written because as she tries to help you escape, she doesn't know exactly what led to you being imprisoned in the simulation, she just has a general idea. You will begin to reclaim some of your memories in these puzzle chambers. Sometimes it's a letter you can read, sometimes it's an audio log. In the first floor, you find out that you're married and had a son, but not much else. Cooper tells you that the simulation operates on a cycle that is entirely dependent on your actions. Every morning you must eat at the restaurant and every night you need to sleep. This will reset the cycle and allow you to proceed to the next day. You'll notice that every time you complete a set of puzzles, the simulation changes slightly, which is tied to you regaining your memories.
Please mind your step. Seems one of our guests left in something of a hurry. Seems that Mr. Crow left in something of a hurry.
With this information, I think it's alright to go ahead and just tell you the rest of the story without mentioning everything in between, because you don't get the entire picture until the very last puzzle. The character you play as is named Alex, and his son's name is Robin. As time goes on, Robin eventually succumbs to an unknown illness that the doctors are unable to identify. Senator Crow, a recently elected politician, made some drastic changes to the healthcare system in the state that they lived in, which caused Alex and his wife, Maddie, to fall into debt due to the medical bills. Eventually, they accumulate too much debt and their insurance underwriter, named Matthews, is unable to sign off on any more medical coverage. Without the coverage, and with no clue as to what Robin was afflicted with, he eventually dies. I will never forget this part of the story, not just because it's a little sad, but because I had to listen to a woman crying to the sound of a flatline for 5 minutes straight until I could finally solve the puzzle and move on. Eventually, Alex and Maddie get a divorce, and our man turns to drinking. He began to blame Crow, Matthews, and the doctor who was unable to cure his son, Dr. Wright, for Robin's death. He started stalking all of them, and you can probably see where this is going. Maddie found out what Alex was planning, but not before he pushed Matthews in front of an incoming subway and killed him. In order to prevent Alex from completing his plan to kill everybody involved in Robin's death and then commit suicide, she decided to forge his signature and have him checked in to the Penrose Hotel. Cooper thought that Maddie had betrayed Alex before she found out the entire story. And like I said at the beginning of this section, I think that her voice acting is spot on.
Your wife, ex-wife, she was trying to protect you. But you weren't just a victim. You wanted to hurt people. Maybe you still do. Maybe you already have.
After finding out the true reason that Alex is in the simulation, which only comes after you finish the final puzzle and gain access to the roof, she reluctantly guides him to his room as she realizes that she's been helping a murderer. Whenever you walk out of your room the next day, you'll see an open door. Upon further investigating, you'll see that Alex has been watched the entire time. There's a handwritten note from him saying that the hotel manager needs to do anything in its power to keep him from leaving because he's a danger to himself and those around him. Once you arrive on the roof, you see the hotel manager. He essentially says that this isn't the first time Alex has gotten this far. He's tried to escape numerous times in the past, but always decided to stay in order to save the people that he was going to kill, including himself. Because the simulation was built around Alex, the manager would change things about it in order to better suit his preferences. Whenever it was full of people and entertainment, Alex rejected it, so the manager made sure that he was the only person in the hotel. The manager urges him to go back to the hotel and forget his pain, while Cooper wants him to leave the simulation and says that nobody has to die, and that he can decide to do the right thing once he's out. Before we make the final decision, I want to talk about what the right choice is, or what it might be, because as far as morally ambiguous decisions go, this is one of the better ones I've experienced outside of an RPG. We know that Alex is a murderer who was consumed with the grief of losing his son. We know that this is not the first time that he has attempted to escape, and it very well may not be the last. This by itself is enough to believe that we may only be delaying the inevitable, but there's a bit more to consider. Every time he reclaims his memories and finds out what he's done, he decides the best decision is to stay in the simulation. I'm going to put the note he left in the observation room on the screen, and I encourage you to read it real quick. To me, this message can be taken one of two ways. Either Alex has now reclaimed enough of his memories to where he once again feels tempted to go through with the murderers and probably still wants to die, or he's disgusted at his previous actions and is simply afraid that if he's released he will proceed with the murders. I think that this is intentionally vague, but to me this leans more heavily towards the former. The first thing that came to mind whenever I began to really think about this dilemma was Prey 2017. I haven't played the game personally, but I have watched some videos on the story, and I know enough about its main themes to bring it up here. In Prey, your main character has undergone a procedure numerous times that has resulted in them having their memories removed from a certain period of time. This isn't 100% correct, but it's close enough to prevent spoilers. Every time your character would come out of the procedure, they had a change of heart about the experiments they were performing and had a different opinion on how they should be stopped. I'm mentioning this now because there is a chance that Alex reclaiming his memories within the simulation has helped him bring an outside perspective to what he's done in the past, and that he is actually a different person than he was back then. This could be why he believed he was too dangerous to be set loose and decided to stay in the simulation instead of seizing the opportunity to escape and finish what he started. But as great as this dilemma is, it's almost entirely ruined by the fact that what the manager told you isn't technically correct. Even a great story isn't without its plot holes. As you explore the hotel throughout the game, you'll find various journal entries from the woman who designed the hotel. I'm going to show all 9 of these as I talk about them in case you want to pause the video and read them yourself. It starts off with her getting the job at Spectrum. She speaks about how she wants to design the perfect experience as the ultimate vacation. She mentions how she's afraid that some of the clients who are using the simulations are trying to escape their problems instead of simply taking a vacation from work, and that there's no way to tell for sure who is and isn't a safety threat. A few logs later, she mentions how she was battling the company board saying that the simulation isn't safe. She also mentions that she has a girl in support trying to help her out, which I assume is Cooper. It's never exactly said why the simulation is dangerous or why she had such a big problem with it. The final log is found in the observation room. Whatever fight this girl was putting up ended in her getting fired. She intentionally dumped these logs into the simulation's engine to try and tell people inside that they should protest against Spectrum. She says they're a corrupt organization and that she's relying on Cooper, although she never calls her by name. Unfortunately, this only creates more questions than answers. None of this information really fits into the broader story, and I only draw 2 conclusions from it. The first one is that this employee found out that Alex was being held against his will and was battling with the Spectrum executives to have him released. This would match up with something that Cooper tells you in the beginning of the game.
We have to put things right, and that starts with you.
The issue with this is that the final log mentions the only reason she lost the fight against the board was because they only cared about profits, which would have nothing to do with them refusing to release a murderer, assuming that they even knew since there's no indication that anybody else did. The other option is that these memories Alex experiences aren't real. Spectrum is faking these things within the simulation to keep people from ever leaving. This one makes even less sense than the first because if this was the case, Cooper would have known and wouldn't have been so shocked whenever she finds out. She even mentions that she remembers hearing about the murder when it happened and thought it was just an accident.
This was it. I remember it. This is the night that Matthews died. What did you do, Alex? What did you do?
So this also can't be what the logs are trying to tell us. If anybody watching right now who's smarter than me wants to put in the comments what you think these logs mean, then feel free to leave one below. To me, I feel like the lack of conclusiveness cheapens the impact of these logs and brings down the overall story a little by making you question things without having any real answers to them. It cheapens the revelation when the manager tells you that the entire simulation is built around you. It's more that the simulation was designed to hold anybody in their own personal experience disconnected from anybody else's, but it wasn't designed with the purpose of holding Alex hostage. It takes a real interesting point and makes it a little less. But it could just be that I misunderstood what he meant and I'm a victim of my own interpretation. The first time I played this game, I decided to leave the hotel. I believe that a man's freedom isn't something that should be taken from him, and I honestly felt like he would be okay. But after playing again, I honestly feel like Alex is better off forgetting his past. The loss of his son was so impactful that it pushed him to his breaking point, and I think that he's safe inside the simulation. In a way, the simulation does serve as a prison cell for him, but at least in here he doesn't need to live with the pain of what he had to go through. Cooper apologizes for ever getting involved and says her last goodbyes.
I shouldn't have... It wasn't my place to put you through this. I thought I was helping. I'm sorry. Goodbye.
You wake up in your hotel room to the sound of somebody knocking on the door, and the game ends. I didn't really talk about the atmosphere of this game or how completing the floor puzzles affects the simulation around you. The staff slowly loses their friendly tones and simply starts asking if there's something they can help you with. The music starts detuning into a creepier version of the original. The various paintings go through phases where they'll show Alex's son, the murder targets, and then just a photo of himself in a hoodie. There's a lot of smaller details I didn't go into in order to keep this video on the short side, but they make the hotel portions of the game much better. Since you retread much of the same ground, the game is even nice enough to start teleporting you to where you need to be instead of just making you walk all the way every time. It makes it a lot less monotonous. There's some minor environmental puzzles that you can solve to get the code to the next puzzle chamber, and if mannequins freak you out like they do me, then there's even a jump scare or two at some points. Overall, there's a lot of love that went into this game. Even though a lot of the puzzles are easy, I still enjoyed going through them. I just wish that there were a few more really challenging ones that I could get stuck on, but that only happened once. The story may sound pretty basic, but the way you unravel the mystery of your past and the way Cooper reacts to the information makes it a lot more enjoyable. I think the final decision is very well designed to make you feel unsure about either option, but I feel like the ambiguity of the additional logs hamper its effect by giving you more questions with no true answers, and it brings down an otherwise conclusive story. Overall, I think that the game is worth the asking price, but just barely. Even if you've gotten to this point in the video and you've had basically the entire story spoiled, I think I've left out enough of the smaller details for you to still enjoy the experience, including almost all of Cooper's dialogue. For a video game designed by one person and their publisher, I think it succeeds more than it fails. Thanks for watching, everyone. This next little section is just going to be a little informational piece that I'm putting in to let the people who've been waiting on this video know kind of what took so long. And basically, I decided to order an actual microphone so I could get some better audio. And ironically enough, as I was trying to figure out the proper position for the mic to get the best quality, it caused some of the audio in this video to sound a little bit inconsistent. But I'd already originally recorded the script and then re-recorded it with this microphone, so it's really just something that I'm going to have to be happy with unless I want to re-record all the audio and then go back and splice it back into the video, and that's just not something I really want to do. As far as future projects go, I'm currently playing through the God of War games. I've already beaten one, I'm working on the next one, so we're 1 out of 7, 6 more to go. Hopefully I can keep it about 20 to 30 minutes per game to keep it from being too terribly long, but I wanted to go into more detail than just talking about the bare minimum, so that's mostly what's going to be taking up most of the time. Other than that, between college and some things that are going on in the family right now, I don't want to go into too many details, things are going to be moving a little bit slow, especially this week and probably the next couple months coming up. I think after this semester, things are really going to even out and I'll be able to have more free time to do this. But just kind of keep in mind that it may be a little bit longer between videos. I'm going to try and have at least something out once every few weeks, but there's really no promises there. It just depends on what all I can think about to do for a video. This is kind of just something that I wanted to throw together last month after I lost all the Fable 3 footage, and I just, as I said, bought a new microphone, decided to delay it until I had the new audio. So, like I said, I appreciate everyone who watched the video today, everyone who stuck around to this last section. I know I'm kind of notorious for giving channel updates and just talking about stuff that's going on, but it really does kind of come with a sense of obligation to keep you guys updated and not leave you in the dark whenever things are going on, because I know that I do have at least a handful of people who frequently do watch these videos, and I feel like you guys might want to know what's going on there. So, all that being said, I'd like everyone watching to stay safe and stay healthy and all that good jazz. I will try and get some more projects out. I will think of some stuff, I'm sure, and I will catch you guys.